Now, the first thing you would do is you'd hold your breath.
He didn't create this situation of fear, he merely exploited it.
Phoning in questions concerning the invasion.
It's on another record, which will come in later, but I'm keeping the record on which it was originally recorded.
Perhaps the most often asked question, or one related to it, is one that we nor no one else, unfortunately, can answer.
Kinda neat, because part of the background. I'll explain in a minute.
Okay.
You start to see it. Anyway,
Would
you like to do the intro? Because you already nailed it.
Oh, did I nail it? Wonderful. Welcome to It Began in the Basement. I'm Megan.
I'm Laura.
And today we will be talking about alchemy.
Assuming you've had any prior interest in alchemy, what have you found interesting about it in the past?
I've usually seen it in the context of pop culture.
Right.
So it tends to be a plot device most of the time, where in a lot of cases I feel like more masculine-themed entertainment doesn't want to go like the witchy route.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll go alchemy, which seems more sciencey.
That's actually a really interesting point. I could totally see that. Huh. Yeah, no. The male witch is still very much a that don't real.
It's like a male nurse.
Yeah, exactly.
You can do the same job. It's fine.
Everybody can be spooky. It's great.
Or a nurse. Or a spooky nurse.
All for that, absolutely,
Yes.
1000%. For me, this is going to sound completely shallow, but also I spend a lot of time on Tumblr. I have amassed this small collection of Tumblrs that I follow. Is Tumblr's even whatever?
Tumblr-eye?
Tumblr. That sounds less awful. That all they do is post art from Europe, 1400 onward, or very specific, like, pulpy horror stuff, and a lot of the recurring things there is alchemical art.
Mm-hmm.
So my particular favorites from those are the engravings and woodcuts, which I feel really capture that old world feel, which obviously it should, because the majority of the stuff that I personally love the most comes from the 15 and 1600s.
Mm-hmm.
So...
Well, that's kind of where it was born, at least from the research that I was doing.
What, the art itself?
The alchemy and its popularity starts in, like, the 1500s.
When people normally think alchemy, at least to me, they normally think it's probably pseudoscience, or it's a relic of the past, it has no bearing on today. Originally, before I did the research for this episode, I was totally like, I like the art, and that's about as far as it went. That's totally fine, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But what I thought was really interesting was that alchemy was both a philosophical practice and a protoscience. Literally, that means old science. So when I had originally told you that, I was like, oh wait, maybe I'm actually onto something. And I actually discovered this term after I'd started doing the research. When people normally think of alchemy, like you, they normally think that it was just a European phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
But it had an established presence in both Egypt and Asia, in the Muslim world. They don't necessarily share European alchemical traits, but it was just kind of a global thing, and I think it's really neat. The core function of alchemy was to purify and refine to perfection certain objects. The most common examples of these functions were chrysopoeia, literally meaning transmutation into gold. The story of Rumpelstiltskin spinning straw into gold is an example of chrysopoeia. Like, everybody knows that story. And as soon as that article pointed that out, I'm like, oh, okay, like, it's, super approachable. Also, producing an elixir of immortality, creation of panaceas, which is medicine that can cure any illness and prolong life indefinitely, and the development of alkahest. That's how I read that anyway.
I'm gonna go with alkahest.
Okay, because, hey, whatever. And the development of alkahest, which is a universal solvent that could dissolve any other substance, including gold. One of the things in alchemy that you're going to notice is this fixation on gold is, symbolic of the sun as, the penultimate purification symbol. You know what I mean?
That also takes us back to masculinity.
Yep.
Whereas, so solar and masculine as opposed to witchcraft, which is more lunar and feminine.
Bingo! Yep.
And it's also interesting, because I was doing kind of research on the basis of it, too, because I was kind of confused as to what qualified.
Right.
But it seems love is not involved here. Usually with magic, it seems like that's kind of one of the things people want, but here it's money and immortality.
Yes, it is achieving the best end goal possible, whether it's immortality, whether it's wealth, whether it's curing illness, but that can tie into immortality in its own right, that kind of thing.
Well, because you don't want to be immortal and sick.
I would read that novel. I would.
You could write that novel.
Yeah, and then it would probably be like, people would be like, what the fuck am I reading?
Well, we're going to come around to Faustian deals, so...
That's going to be fun.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually have that book, at least the first part. Anyway.
there's a shitload of stuff on Faust
Oh,
I
yeah.
was reading, yeah.
But also, when looking at alchemy in general, I think it's very easy for readers to bypass looking into the attitudes and the cultural beliefs of the time, because that informs the whole spine of what we're examining. So the spine of alchemy was influenced by the worldview of late antiquity. Shocker, right? Such as the 7 classical planets and their corresponding 7 metals, which had been the only ones known and discovered at that time.
Now, what were the classical planets?
I
Does that
don't
just not
know
go as far as Pluto? I mean, it's no
Yes.
longer a planet anyway.
Basically, the 7 classical planets are what are observable through even primitive telescopes from Earth.
Okay.
Because, like, if you think about it, I just don't remember what those are. But from Wikipedia, the 7 classical metals are gold, silver, copper, tin, lead, iron, and mercury.
Now,
which
don't
makes sense.
the symbols correspond with those planets?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And
Because
actually,
they
we'll
are
get
very-
into that too.
Well, they're very pretty. Like, I was looking at a lot of these
I
symbols.
know, isn't alchemical symbolism
They're
so
beautiful,
pretty?
but it's another kind of shorthand.
And I totally get into that too, which is
Mhm.
great. Because a bunch of dudes wanting to keep shit to themselves, and they made things spooky and unreadable, and you know what? I'm totally all about
Well,
that.
it's a club.
So whatever. Yes.
It's like any other club where you want to have secrets and rituals and separate yourself from the plebes who don't know
Yes.
what's up like you do, because you are going to be immortal in your bed of gold.
Yes, exactly. And I'm surprisingly okay with that in this case, because alchemical art is really rather riveting to look at. So I'm like, I'm okay with this. Like, no one actually does this anymore. All this shit is open to the public.
Yeah.
By all means, you know.
Well, I mean, it's the things you draw when you're inhaling a lot of fumes.
Yes, but that's still okay with me. But what I also found particularly interesting based on this worldview is that to the ancients, if you call, 1300, 1600 the ancients, the world itself is forged from these metals. Like, that was the idea. But one of the things that I realized as I was doing the research for this was that the core ends of these pursuits are still very much present in science today, if you think about it. A la working with telomeres to help relieve signs of aging, if not stopping aging entirely. It's the same pursuit. It's just, actual science.
Well, the big thing about alchemy was that it wasn't repeatedly provable, as opposed to more science, which is supposed to be. You're supposed to be able to replicate your experiments. And that's the big issue with alchemy. And as I was going through and reading things that were kind of exposing it as fraud and charlatanism, that was their big argument, was that it couldn't be reliably reproduced. And of course, the excuse for that was that there was some level of mysticism that was missing from the process that only certain people could do.
Well, one of the things that an article I read pointed out, and I thought was really interesting, was current interpretations of alchemism. Even if you're, reading it for fun, which is the thing that I kind of do, people just look at the procedure, at the experiment itself. Whereas alchemy itself, as I mentioned before, is also a philosophical / spiritual practice. That's a whole other can of worms. But, to people who actually believed in this, you could not have one without the other and expect success. So I'm not saying these things ever actually worked, but that was the thinking. So I'm like, the logic does follow in its own way. Kind of expanding on the philosophical part, there are also practices pertaining to alchemy that focus more on spiritual development, and right around then I'm going in my head, I'm like, oh god, here we go. With the ultimate goal of achieving gnosis, which is really the Western form of enlightenment. One of the things that I thought was really interesting was I think it's in an older form of Christianity. Think like early Christians.
Gnosticism?
Yes. There is a goddess of wisdom, and her name is Sophia. She's the goddess of gnosis. Her name is Sophia, and I only remember that because a friend of mine that's her middle name. So it's like women kind of had a better role in early Christianity. Can't we just bring that back? Anyway.
Well, I mean, we could go on a whole tirade about...
The foremost of these philosophical and spiritual practices in Western alchemical practice is Hermeticism. So again, when you think alchemy, your knee-jerk reaction, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, that is drawing mostly from Hermeticism, because it's the West. The West, Europe shit is just spread literally everywhere. In European alchemy, speaking of the Philosopher's Stone, a Philosopher's Stone was an alchemical substance.
Oh, it's an alchemical stub. It's just a little guy. Look at that little guy. He's trying so hard. He just wants to make gold.
In European alchemy, a Philosopher's Stone was an alchemical substance that could prolong one's life, turn base metals into noble metals. Example would be mercury into gold. And the Philosopher's Stone is also arguably the highest point of alchemy, symbolizes the enlightenment, perfection, gnosis. You get the deal. Undertakings to discover the Philosopher's Stone were called the magnum opus, and I have a feeling that's where we get that phrase from.
Yes, because
today.
I also was reading about that. That was what everyone is supposed to aspire to, and only a few reclusive, probably fictional alchemists were ever able to achieve such a thing, which gave people a goal to strive for without really a face to put it to in a lot of cases.
Doesn't that sound like every religious tradition we've encountered in the last God knows how many years?
Yes. Yes, it does.
But there are these recurring themes for a reason. Mm-hmm. Personal points of interest that I thought were rather fascinating were that similar alchemical practices existed in the Indian subcontinent, the Far East, and the Muslim world. Islamic and European alchemists played a very important role. They developed basic laboratory techniques, terminology, theory, and experimental methods, some of which we still use today. So, kind of back to your earlier comment, and that's why I kind of held off on saying anything, because I'd be coming back to this now, is that some of the methods we have today date from this time of protoscience. So to me, the actual core thinking was fundamentally flawed, but to them it was real based on their understanding of the world at the time, and without their influence, how we conduct science today may very well be different.
Well, we also have the Islamic world to thank for a lot of our math.
It's great. Beyond this, however, alchemists continued working with the model of the four elements, earth, air, water, and fire, which I'm sure you encountered some of the symbolism for that, which was surprisingly basic. 2 of them are straight up triangles, and then 2 of them are facing down with a line.
Line through it.
So I'm like, okay, that's kind of an effect. That is an effective shorthand. Here's the kicker, and they hid their work in ciphers. Their work was guided by Hermetic principles, which is the aforementioned spiritual component of alchemical practice.
They are giggly high school girls. They're just like, look at my note. Did you get my note? It's in code. Do you like me? Uppy triangle or downy triangle?
So I think also with these ciphers and how they basically codified everything, this is part of the reason why, to me at least, alchemical art is so interesting.
Yes.
I cannot speak to Islamic alchemy because I just don't know anything about it. But anyway, for European alchemy and the philosophical and spiritual traditions, the foremost of which that I'd already mentioned was Hermeticism. And in this practice, alchemy fundamentally pertains to the spiritual rather than the physical.
So this is more magically.
Yes. The idea of transmutation, for example, like lead into gold, is an analogy for personal change, refinement, and perfection, which I think is kind of neat. Like that I can get behind. So the writings of Hermes Trismegistus, which means thrice great. I'm like, oh god, as soon as I heard this, I'm like,
I came across that name too, and I was like, Triz next.
Trismegistus.
Trismegistus.
The writings of Hermes Trismegistus are the primary source for alchemical theory. Now, Trismegistus was called, quote-unquote, thrice great, and it sounds douchey as hell, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. Because, at least as far as we know, that name comes from the book called The Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus, which I don't think he named in his defense. He, and quote-unquote, I thought this was, like, the best way of summarizing it, he knew the 3 parts of wisdom of the whole universe, alchemy, astrology, and theurgy. Writers as recent as Emerson considered Trismegistus a wise pagan prophet that foresaw the coming of Christianity. The fact that it was as recent as Emerson really stuck out to me.
But if you were a pagan and you saw Christianity coming, that's not great for you.
Well, I think people mistook Trismegistus's core writings, because his core writings were very monotheistic in a time where that was not really all that common, so I think people are misinterpreting that as predicting the coming of Christianity. Hermeticism itself claims that it is descended from a single, quote-unquote, true theology that is present in all religions and given by God to man in late antiquity. Sound familiar?
Well, they all say they're the one true religion.
Bingo, that's why I say that.
Yeah.
This monotheistic tradition extends a bit further. According to Hermeticism, God is unitary and transcendent. God exists separate from the material cosmos. One of the things that I found personally interesting in the past is the idea of pantheism, which is basically saying that God is the universe and the universe is God. They do not exist separately. I don't believe in that myself, but I thought that was rather beautiful in comparison, like that beautiful scene that you might see from your cabin, for example, like that is a natural extension of God itself. Like to me, that's more an attitude of let's take care of what we already have, because what we already have is holy in the fact that it is what it is. Remember how Trismegistus got his name? The 3 forms of wisdom in the universe: alchemy, astrology, and theurgy. In the Hermetic tradition, alchemy, which is the operation of the sun, kind of back to what we were talking about earlier, is not just about the transmutation of things like lead into gold. It is also an exploration of, and I took this quote from Wikipedia because, again, it was one of those really good summaries, it is an exploration of the spiritual constitution or life of matter and material existence through an application of the mysteries of birth, death, and resurrection. The various stages of chemical distillation and fermentation, among other processes, are aspects of these mysteries that, when applied, quicken nature's processes in order to bring a natural body to perfection.
Mm-hmm.
For some reason, that makes me think mummification? Probably not what they had in mind, but... Astrology, on the other hand, which is the operation of the stars, tells that the movements of the planets have important meaning that lies beyond the laws of physics. Everybody knows what astrology is, and I think that's really interesting that one of the core tenets of alchemy survives in popular culture today. Like, you can just snap open the paper and find your zodiac sign. Like, I just think it's kind of
Even though
neat.
they've all shifted now, but I digress.
Oh, yeah, NASA found, like, its 13th.
Yeah, there's a 13th
constellation
one that
or
everyone's
something.
just going to ignore anyway.
Oh, yeah, and I think NASA said something like, that wasn't the point, we were just kind of messing around. I'm like, yeah.
I mean, it's
I feel like it's 90% of science. It's just...
I know, I always picture some, like, little guy in a lab coat that's just like, I just thought it was neat.
That is my academia. It's just like, oh, sorry, we fucked everybody's everything
I
up.
just wanted to share. Didn't think anybody would be so mad.
Yeah, basically. But I think where popular culture really loses the core whatever it is of astrology and alchemical use is, according to Hermeticism, the movements of the stars and planets do not control our actions, but they may influence them. So when people are like, I'm a Leo, I do this, I'm like, take for granted astrology was a valid thing for like a split second. Don't use the movements of the stars to justify being a shitty human being. But that could extend to religion, really. Being like, astrology's neat, like, okay, let's read about it, have fun, but don't...
Well, it's the same thing with any other kind of divination.
Yep, divination's so much fun. The third arm of the three wisdoms of the universe is theurgy, which is the operation of the gods. It speaks of magic, specifically two kinds. Goetic, which is black and based on an alliance with evil spirits, and I'm like, yep, done. And theurgy, which is divine and based on an alliance with beings like angels.
Well,
thumbs down.
Who's offering what here? Because I'm gonna need a menu.
True that. In 1300 to 1600 AD, Hermeticism had its own role to play in influencing the development of science as we know it today, which I mentioned earlier. The core influencing idea being that idea of controlling or influencing nature, which is one of the things we see in a lot in science today, which I thought was rather interesting.
And also goes back to the patriarchal idea that we need to subdue nature instead of coexisting with it.
Ding, we have a winner. Inspired a number of scientists during this period to look to magic and similar arts. Again, alchemy, astrology, etc. The end result was that they could put nature to the test through experiments. Most importantly, it was the practical aspects of Hermetic writings that drew the attention of scientists. It was the practical aspects, not the
I'm
spiritual
sure,
religious.
like, all of this it's shooting in the dark.
Yep.
Nothing had been discovered to this degree yet.
And also, what I think is also super interesting is that Isaac Newton had a lot of personal investment and faith in the idea of a quote-unquote pure ancient doctrine. He used this to assist his understanding of the physical world. He had some fingers in the pie of Hermeticism.
Well, he was quite religious, wasn't he?
Yes. But what I think is really interesting about this time period that alchemy was so popular and so utilized is that, again, we have some products now that yes, date back to that time, but also for ages, science and magic were not really two separate camps as they are today.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think seeing that evolution step by step, like when we research things like this, it's kind of neat to look back to see, oh, this is why we have X, Y, and Z, and I'm glad we have X, Y, and Z because now we know that telomeres cause aging. I'm sure you've heard the phrase, especially because you are interested in the things you are, as above, so below. So I'd originally heard that when I was 14, 15. So like in my defense, I was a teenager. Nobody expects anything rational out of teenagers. So,
you shouldn't.
Yeah, exactly. You know what? That's okay. You're a teenager for a reason. Just get all your gonzo bullshit out of your system. I was reading a Llewellyn book, and those books are still my mom's. I never got rid of them. It was mentioned in one of those books. And so as above, so below is a shortened version of a longer phrase, which translated by Dennis W. Hawke says, that which is below corresponds to that which is above, and that which is above corresponds to that which is below to accomplish the miracle of the one thing. This line is found in Trismegistus's book, The Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus. So basically, this breaks down to, because it sounds like redundant, like, you know, kind of circle jerky, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when this article, broke it down, I was like, okay, I can get behind this. Whatever happens on any level of reality, physical, emotional, or mental, also happens on every other level. To understand other aspects of existence, one should turn inward first, as a possible pathway to better understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Final part of mine. Hermeticism also deals with reincarnation, which makes sense given what we've already discussed, in a very strict sense of morality. And at this, I'm like, oh my god, guys, please don't. Nous, which is reason and knowledge, which is just one word that summarizes the both of them.
Nous.
It's nous, which is we in French, the two of us. So that's why, literally, yeah. That's, yeah.
It's cute.
So nous brings forth good or evil, but good is strictly pertaining to God, so that's where things get super strict. Evil is brought about by the influence of demons, and I think alchemy is very interesting. Mostly I'm just obsessed with the art, as I've said a million times before, but I'm like, can we have the pretty things without the, if you don't do it my way, you're wrong? You know what I mean?
I think that's just people in power get obsessed with being correct.
Yep.
Because if they are not correct, I think they fear that it will remove them from power. Being able to admit that you are wrong is a very difficult thing for a lot of people to do.
That's a whole discussion on ego in the West, because nothing in our dogmas really discusses ego.
No, it does not. I mean, you get other issues from that as well, especially when people are either in alchemical positions where they are held to such a high standard as sort of those people that I was reading about in alchemy who supposedly attained their magnum opus. I was looking up the roles that alchemy has played in literature, culture, and now pop culture.
Right.
And so alchemy even played a role in the early evolution of paint.
Really?
Yes.
That's cool.
So there's a lot of pigment recipes that were influenced by both practical and theoretical aspects of alchemy, and kind of had some magical elements to them.
Right.
And you'll see many paintings that depict alchemy. And it's a lot of what you described, but I think it's a little more of the hermetic aspects of it. It's less a scientist in his lab and more a performer in these images.
Right. Yep.
And so you see the mystic or the magician performing these acts, usually of transmutation, because that's the fancy thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's very difficult to visually depict immortality.
This guy is 30.
Forever.
Yeah, just a little serpent. Just
infinite, forever.
Forever.
But it's continued into contemporary works. And it's kind of difficult to pull alchemy as a theme apart from the superficial visuals of it. So while some works really pull up the practice, a lot of it just kind of looks cool.
And that's totally okay. Also, hold on a second. Did not want to do that overlay.
Sounded like you're going...
Cocaine and alchemy, man.
This is how I turn coke into productivity.
Okay.
Anyway, artists who were mentioned who were more into the superficial beauty of alchemy were Pollock, Duchamp, and Dali. So it's just something to consider. Some people really embed it deeply in their work and they want it to have a great meaning, but again, I kind of just eye roll because it looks cool. It looks cool. That's okay. Yep. It doesn't need to be more than that, although I have written many an artist statement and I realize that that's often more important than your piece.
I wish people would embrace the fact that sometimes you want to do an art just because you like an idea and you want to explore it.
99% of my paintings are, I want to draw a deer. I got a good picture of one. And that's it.
And that's, you know what, if it turns out better than you expected, it's actually pretty good. Or you learn something along the way, and that's totally great.
Well, there it is. Made a deer.
Not everything has to be, super meaningful and,
The theme of transformation, which is prevalent in art and also an overall theme in alchemy, I can see that being incorporated into contemporary art.
Oh, sure.
But again, it's all about that statement of justifying the piece. Yeah, you got a good eye roll in there, too.
No.
So moving on to texts. Around the 1500s, a lot of alchemy is being written or exposed as a pseudoscience. Dante's Inferno does this. Chaucer does this. Goodwin does this. I can understand why. If you're seeing a lot of this going on around you and you're kind of eye-rolling at it, and you're a writer, you're going to put it down like any other contemporary event.
Oh, yeah, call it out for what it is.
But as time moves along, alchemy became more of a plot point, such as in Frankenstein. Even The Hunchback of Notre Dame has some in it, and Faust.
Oh, like, I always love hearing things like this, because as soon as you hear it, the Frankenstein point just make you like, oh my god,
It
it's
makes
totally
so much
right!
sense. But yeah, golden immortality in this case.
I'm just like, oh shit, that's so cool!
Well, I think it's a lot of viewing life as a product and being able to create that product.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have things like the Philosopher's Stone, which makes an unlimited amount of gold and life, they're both distilled down to product and a consumable.
And when it's unlimited, it's worthless.
Yeah. It's worth everything and it's worth nothing all at once.
Yep.
So let's kind of go into Faust, because I found that really interesting. I chased that Wikipedia rabbit hole. Faust is a figure that's seen in many plays, operas, and books. He's supposedly inspired by Dr. Johann Georg Faust, but the actual Faust is supposed to be an alchemist in addition to being an astrologer and magician during the German Renaissance. It's kind of hard to say what's true and what isn't about Faust. Even in the 1800s, people weren't sure if he was a historical figure or if he'd kind of been amalgamated from a bunch of different people. He may have been Johann Faust, which was Johann Gutenberg's business partner. So the character of Faust is depicted as being the unhappy scholar. He's bored, so he ends up making a deal with the devil. As usual, the devil wants payment in souls. In exchange for his soul, he'll get all knowledge and worldly pleasures. In early versions, this isn't discussed very well, and Faust loses out to the devil, and the devil takes him to hell. In later versions of the story, he is spared by the virtue of a woman that he and the devil worked to seduce, or because God just likes people who strive real hard. But it's the origin of the term Faustian, which I would like to use far more often as a word. So it's a word that describes kind of a deal with the devil, where you give up your moral integrity to gain power and success, but it has limits or catches.
So basically every deal with the devil.
Yeah, it's every deal with the devil. You get what you want, but there's a cost.
But I do like that term, though.
Yeah, I do too.
Very fancy.
So as we kind of move forward in time, alchemy in plays and literature becomes a lot more romanticized. It goes more to the Hermetic idea. It's more magical or mystical, and it's blended with other occult practices. So it's not alchemy independently, it's alchemy combined with other magical ideas. So everyone from Lovecraft to Terry Pratchett to even Dean Koontz is in on this. It's pretty common in fantasy fiction as sort of a catch-all, putting magic in something without it feeling too witchy.
Mm-hmm.
So that brings us to what's literary alchemy. And it's any literature which deals in discussing alchemical practices or processes, or uses alchemy in an allegorical sense. So you can either show the course of an alchemical process within the writing, or you can follow the personal development of a character that would parallel something in alchemy. It's the transformation of that character.
You could really apply literary alchemy to basically a ton of fiction, because
Yeah,
that's character development, that's all sorts of stuff.
But there are some works where they parallel alchemical experiments or practices almost like that's their hero's journey. Each phase is parallel to a certain stage in alchemy that's going towards an end process.
Okay, gotcha.
Many books and movies still reference alchemy, and of course the most popular in recent memory is the Harry Potter series.
Harry Potter, the Philosopher's Stone.
Yeah, you bring the Philosopher's Stone back into it, and it's pretty much the same as what we discussed earlier. It makes base metals into gold, and it creates the elixir of life. So again, we're back to the whole main motivations of alchemy: wealth, immortality.
One of the things that comes to mind is when Harry's looking in the mirror of Erised in the final stage, and spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't somehow read the books or seen the movie in the last, 10 years. Anyway, Harry's looking in the mirror of Erised, and the only person who can get the Philosopher's Stone is somebody who 100% does not actually want it for what it was made for.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of an interesting... I'm sure Rowling did that intentionally, whereas the Philosopher's Stone, its sole purpose is to extend life, is to make things of value, let into gold, but Harry doesn't want it for that purpose at all, and therefore he is the only one that's able to get it.
Well, he would also like to not be murdered.
That's also a thing, but the Philosopher's Stone technically doesn't cover that, so...
Alright, buddy, you can have it, yeah.
Yep, exactly. So I just thought that was interesting, or just remembered that.
Yeah, I agree. I loved that series.
Yep. We also probably have Harry Potter to quote-unquote blame for the witch craze that's going on right now.
I'm okay with that. It's fine by me.
Yep.
Lots of pretty paintings, lots of great reads.
And so much clothing. So much great clothing. Ugh.
So, wrap her up for us, Laura.
So, in summary, alchemy was, in all fairness, for late antiquity, it was a proto-science. Not saying it was science as in the tried and true what we have today, but alchemy, it seems like, laid at least a part of the foundation for what we have. It was a precursor. Yeah, it was for scientific practices we have it today. But today we have learned to basically just separate church from state.
So, Laura, do you want to hear all the possible titles that I came up with while I was waiting for you to drive here?
Shoot.
Okay.
And I'm assuming we're editing this out because we don't want anyone else to steal our titles for things.
No, they're good. People can hear them.
Okay.
All right.
They want to steal the titles.
They won't. They won't. I'm saying them. I'm saying them. They're my titles. All right. Dore Alchemy. It's all about alchemy. You can call me Alchemy.
That's my favorite.
All for one and one for alchemy. Or alchemy contains artificial ingredients.
Oh my god. I can't choose. Oh.
We're gonna have to pick one.
Yeah, I know. I think they called me Alchemy. I think that's like the one that's most,
awesome.
Direct. And also, yeah, if you actually want to use one of the public domain images I sent you for the art for this episode, those are pretty great.
I've gotten really quick at throwing those together. I have a process.
Good.
Thank you for listening. This has been It Began in the Basement.
We are on Podbean, YouTube, and Facebook.
Under It Began in the Basement. Type that into any search bar and we will come up. Hope to see you next week.